You're smarter than most people. You just do it alone, which is probably why almost no one has ever noticed, including, on some days, you. If that lands as both a little arrogant and quietly true, stay with the second feeling, because it may be the most accurate thing anyone has said about your mind in years. You go blank in the fast room and think of the perfect answer 3 hours later, alone in the car. You lose whole conversations in the moment, then rebuild them by yourself into something sharper than anyone who was actually talking walked away with. The world tends to read that as slow or shy or not quite sharp enough. The world is wrong, and it has been wrong about this exact kind of mind for more than 100 years. That is not a pep talk.
I found your vibe, and I found my high, yeah. Let's touch the sky, I'ma change your life.
The influential psychologist who ever lived was built this way, and he bet his entire career on it. In 1913, Carl Jung, 38 years old and the chosen heir to Sigmund Freud, walked away from all of it, lost nearly every friend he had, and vanished into years of near-total solitude that everyone around him could only call a breakdown. Here is the strange part. That so-called breakdown produced almost everything Jung is remembered for. The archetypes, individuation, the work that reshaped modern psychology. All of it came out of the years he spent alone, doing what looked, from the outside, like nothing at all. Because Jung wasn't losing his mind in that silence. He was finally free to use it. By the end of this, you are going to understand your own mind better than the people who spent years quietly underestimating it. Starting with why the world gets this so consistently wrong. Start with what almost everyone believes, because Jung's whole story only makes sense against it. We treat intelligence as something visible. It shows up in the room, it answers fast, argues well, publishes, gets cited, climbs. We trust the mind that performs in public, and we quietly distrust the one that goes quiet. Think about how thoroughly you were trained into this. The child who answered first was the smart one. The colleague who talks most in the meeting reads as the sharpest, even when all they really are is the loudest. We hand the promotions to the visible, and we privately wonder about the quiet ones. And we treat withdrawal as a warning sign. When someone steps back from the world, cancels the plans, stops returning the calls, and starts spending long stretches alone, we reach for a diagnosis. Something's wrong with them. They're depressed, they're isolating, they're coming apart. That instinct isn't stupid. Sometimes it is exactly right. Real decline often does look like withdrawal, and caring people are trained to watch for precisely that. The culture around us reinforces it at every turn, because achievement is supposed to be seen. A mind that matters is a mind other people can watch working. So hold that lens up to Zurich in 1913. A celebrated doctor cuts ties with his mentor. His career stalls. His friends stop calling. He starts spending hours alone, writing and drawing things he refuses to show anyone, talking, apparently, to figures who are not in the room. Every observer reached the conclusion the culture had trained them to reach. Jung was breaking down. Nobody thought to ask the other question, the one this whole video turns on. What if he was doing the opposite? And if you have ever pulled back from the world and watched people decide, out loud, that something must be wrong with you, then you already know how completely that lens can misread the thing it is staring straight at. Here is what that lens could not see. There is a difference between a mind that is failing and a mind that is changing direction. Jung himself would later give that direction a name. In his 1921 book, Psychological Types, he described two basic orientations a mind can have. One faces outward, toward people and objects and the world. The other faces inward, toward the inner life, before it deals with anything outside. He called the inward orientation introversion, and he was careful to insist it did not mean shy, and it did not mean broken. It meant a mind whose real center of gravity sits on the inside. For a mind built like that, going inward is not a collapse. It is a homecoming. It is what I call solitude-activated intelligence, a way of thinking that only switches on fully once the noise of other people stops. And in 1913, Jung was about to run the most extreme experiment in that kind of thinking anyone has ever documented. Some nights the screen is the wrong place for this. If you'd rather just listen, Surreal Mind is on Spotify now. The words, in the dark, wherever you are, links in the description. Because the world was watching Jung through the one lens that could only read solitude as sickness. Therefore, it completely missed what the silence was for. And to understand what it was for, you have to see the man he was before it started. For most of his early career, Jung was exactly the kind of mind the world knows how to reward. Brilliant in the room, quick on his feet, a rising psychiatrist at the famous Burg Hölzli Clinic in Zurich, publishing research on word association and the hidden structure of the mind that got him noticed across Europe while he was still young. Then, in 1906, he began writing to Sigmund Freud, and the connection was immediate and intense. Freud was the founder of psychoanalysis, the gravitational center of the entire new field. He saw in Jung something close to a son. It is hard to overstate how close the two became. For years they wrote to each other constantly, long letters trading dreams and theories late into the night, and Freud worked to install Jung as the first president of the international psychoanalytic movement, the public face of everything he had built. Freud openly called him the heir, the crown prince, the one who would carry the work into the next generation. So, for a few years, Jung had everything the biblical definition of intelligence. Proximity to genius, a movement behind him, a clear path straight up. If the story had ended there, he would be a footnote in Freud's biography, a talented lieutenant who did as he was told. But Jung kept noticing things he could not unnotice. He was pulled toward territory Freud had declared off limits. Myth, religion, the deeper and older layers of the mind that would not reduce cleanly to Freud's theory of sexuality. Jung came to believe Freud had mistaken one room of the psyche for the whole house. And he knew, with total clarity, that if he ever wrote down what he actually thought, it would cost him the single most important relationship in his professional life. He wrote it anyway. The book was Wandlungen und Symbole der Libido, later known in English as Symbols of Transformation. Jung understood exactly what he was doing while he wrote it. By his own account, he was tormented, unable to touch his pen for 2 months, weighing whether to keep his real thoughts to himself or risk losing everything. He chose the truth over the position, and the position collapsed on schedule. It ended his friendship with Freud. What happened after is the part that matters. In Jung's own words, from his memoir, after the break with Freud, all my friends and acquaintances dropped away. My book was declared rubbish. I was a mystic, and that settled the matter. Overnight, the anointed successor became a man alone, cut loose from the movement that had defined him, watched by former colleagues who had already written him off. This is where the story stops being about a career and starts being about a mind. Jung's own description of what came next is quiet and exact. After the parting of the ways with Freud, he wrote, a period of inner uncertainty began for me. He later gave the years that followed a name that became a chapter title in his memoir, The Confrontation with the Unconscious. Now watch what he actually did with that uncertainty, because it is the reverse of what the visible definition of intelligence would predict. He did not fight to win his standing back. He did not rush out a rebuttal, rebuild the network, get himself back into the important rooms. He went the other way entirely, inward and alone. He began deliberately sitting with the images that rose up in his solitude. Instead of dismissing the figures that formed in his imagination, he let them speak, argued with them, and wrote down what they said. He built a whole clinical method out of this later and called it active imagination. In his work on the structure of the psyche, he described it almost like a procedure, a waking dialogue with the parts of the mind that daylight and company usually drown out. One of those inner figures he named Philemon. Jung would walk up and down his garden holding conversations with him the way you would talk with an old teacher. And his words about it are startling coming from a trained psychiatrist. Philemon, he wrote, at times seemed quite real, as if he were a living personality, and represented to Jung a kind of superior insight, something he felt he was receiving rather than inventing. A more fragile mind would have called that back and gone looking for a way to shut it off. Jung treated it as evidence. Those figures, he said, brought home to him a crucial realization that there are things in the psyche which he did not produce, but which produced themselves and had their own life. And the only place he could meet them was in the quiet. Understand how much nerve that took. He was a doctor who had spent his career diagnosing other people's hallucinations and delusions. And here he was, deliberately inviting the same kind of inner material into his own awareness, night after night. With no guarantee he would be able to tell exploration from illness. He described keeping a careful watch on himself the entire time, half scientist and half subject, recording everything as it happened. He was not indulging a fantasy. He was running the most dangerous experiment he knew how to run, on the one instrument he could never replace, his own mind. Here is the reframe the whole story turns on. What looked from the outside like a man losing his grip was on the inside a mind finally running in the only gear it was built for. He wasn't sinking. He was descending on purpose into the one place his intelligence could actually reach full depth. The withdrawal was never the illness. The withdrawal was the instrument powering on. If a story about one man disappearing into himself is quietly describing something you have felt, subscribe. This channel exists to give language to the parts of the mind the world keeps misreading, and comment one line if it fits. Silence isn't the same as struggling. Then stay, because we still haven't answered the obvious question. What is it about being alone that a mind like this actually needs? The answer has two parts, and Jung lived both of them. The first is about how deep thinking actually assembles. Jung believed the most important work of the psyche happens when you hold two opposing things in tension, without forcing a quick resolution, until a third thing emerges that neither side could have produced on its own. He called it the transcendent function. In plain terms, it is what I call the long assembly, the slow fusing of things that do not obviously belong together into something genuinely new. And it comes with a strict requirement. It cannot be hurried, and it cannot be done to a deadline in a room full of people demanding your quick take. It needs long, unbroken solitude to complete. Interrupt it, and it collapses back into noise. You can feel the shape of this, even in small ways. The idea that finally arrives in the shower, on the walk, at the edge of sleep, and almost never in the meeting where you were ordered to produce it on command. Jung was describing that same thing at the deepest level it operates. The mind fusing opposites into something new is doing the most demanding work it is capable of, and that work has a temperature. Turn up the noise, add an audience, start the clock, and it will not set. Picture what it actually asks of you. You are holding, say, a loyalty you cannot betray against a truth you cannot ignore. And instead of killing the discomfort by picking a side fast, you keep both alive, turning them over for as long as it takes. That is draining, and it is fragile, and it is the opposite of a snap decision. A room full of people cannot help you do it. A room full of people is the thing that ends it early, by demanding you resolve the tension into an answer before the answer is actually ready. Jung's whole method was a way of protecting that fragile process long enough for it to finish. The second part is darker, and Jung named it years earlier, in 1915, in a private letter to a friend and colleague named Hans Schmid. He was warning about the hidden cost of being too easily understood by other people. His words: "Understanding is a fearfully binding power, at times a veritable murder of the soul, as soon as it flattens out vitally important differences. The core of a person," he wrote, "is a mystery of life, which is snuffed out the moment it is grasped. Sit with what that means for a mind like Jung's. Out in the world, among people who need to file you quickly into something they already recognize, the strangest and most original part of you gets flattened, smoothed down, understood into something smaller and more familiar than it really is. It is not cruelty. It is just what fast social contact does. Solitude was the one place that pressure lifted. Alone, the part of him the world kept trying to simplify could finally grow to its true size. So the solitude was never a retreat from people. It was the protection of the one thing other people could not help but shrink. None of this means the inward turn is safe. It is not, and Jung knew that better than anyone alive. Going that deep into your own mind, alone, for that long, carries a genuine risk. Some who make that descent do not come back whole. The line between the confrontation that produces a life's work and the one that swallows a person is far thinner than any tidy, inspirational version of this story admits. Jung wrote that during those years, he was at times genuinely afraid he would not find his way back out. And listen to how he kept himself anchored, because this is the whole difference. He said he had to keep reminding himself, deliberately, that he had a family, a home, a profession, an ordinary life with his name on it in the daylight world, precisely because the pull inward was strong enough to make all of that feel distant and unreal. That is not a small admission. It is a man telling you that the same descent that built his life's work could just as easily have ended it. That honesty is exactly why the story is worth telling carefully. The point was never that solitude is automatically good, or that everyone who withdraws is secretly a genius at work. Withdrawal can be the start of a masterpiece or the start of a spiral, and in the early days, from the outside, the two can look almost identical. What tells them apart is not visible to the people watching. It is whether there is still a rope back. What separated his descent from a true breakdown was not that it looked calmer from the outside. It didn't. It was something I would call the integration test. Jung kept one foot in ordinary life the entire time. He kept seeing his patients. He kept his marriage, his house, his daily routines. He treated the solitude as work he came back from, not a country he moved to. Whatever he brought up from the depths, he carried back and put to use in the light. That is the line between solitude that builds a mind and isolation that erodes one, not the intensity of the descent, the return. If you have ever needed to disappear for a while and come back sharper instead of smaller, comment, "I go quiet to come back clear." Because the return is the entire difference. Therefore, the guilt so many people carry about needing to withdraw is aimed at exactly the wrong thing. Here is what the world eventually got in exchange for the years it spent calling Jung broken. Almost his entire body of work traces straight back to that solitude. The archetypes, the deep shared images and patterns, he argued, run underneath every human mind. Individuation, his word for the lifelong process of becoming who you actually are, which he insisted could only happen through inner work, never in the crowd. His whole model of the unconscious as something far older and stranger than a storehouse of repressed wishes. None of it came out of a conference or a debate. All of it came out of a man alone with his own mind, writing by hand. Consider what the archetypes actually claimed. Jung was arguing that underneath your personal memories sits a far older layer, shared across all of humanity, stocked with the same recurring figures and patterns that surface in the myths and dreams of people who never met and never could have copied one another. The wise old man, the shadow, the great mother. He did not arrive at that by surveying thousands of subjects in a lab. He arrived at it by going down into his own depths, alone, meeting those figures firsthand, and only later recognizing them in the myths of cultures all over the world. The single most sweeping claim in his psychology came out of the most private place a person can go. The private record of those years is a document called the Red Book, and it is almost impossible to describe. For years, Jung filled an enormous folio volume with his visions, painted in his own hand in careful, medieval-style script, image after image, dialogue after dialogue, confrontation after confrontation with the figures he met in the depths. He kept it essentially private for the rest of his life. It was not published until 2009, almost half a century after his death, and when it finally appeared, scholars who had spent entire careers on Jung realized they had been studying the branches of a tree whose roots were sitting in that book the whole time. And years later, Jung gave the solitude a physical body. In 1922, he bought a strip of land on the upper lake of Zurich and began building a stone tower with his own hands. In his words, "The beginning of the tower, the house which I built for myself at Bollingen. No electricity, no running water for years. He chopped his own wood, lit his own fire, cooked his own food, and carved meaning into the actual stones of the walls. He would go there for weeks at a stretch and sit in a silence so complete that he said thoughts rose to the surface that a crowded life would have kept buried for good. The most influential psychologist of the modern age needed a tower of stone just to hear himself think, and he considered it one of the truest things he ever built. And this is the part that matters most for anyone watching who recognizes themselves in him. Jung did not simply survive his solitude, he turned it into a method. Active imagination, the deliberate practice of going inward, meeting what you find there and carrying it back, was his gift to everyone who came after with the same wiring. What he was saying, in effect, is that the inward turn does not have to be something that only happens to you in a crisis. It can be something you choose and structure and come back from on purpose. The solitude can be a practice instead of a symptom. Late in his life, looking back, Jung said something about those first solitary years that should stop anyone who has ever felt guilty for needing them. "The years when I was pursuing my inner images," he wrote, "were the most important in my life. In them, everything essential was decided. Everything that came after," he said, "was only the working out of what had burst forth in that time alone." He called those years the prima materia for a lifetime's work. There is a reason a man who understood the human mind that deeply kept being mistaken for a man who had lost his. That mistake, and why the world keeps making it specifically about the people who see the most, is its own story, and it's coming. Stay subscribed for it. Jung is the clearest case, but he is nowhere near the only one. Look closely at the origin stories of a surprising number of the people who changed how we think, and the same shape keeps appearing. Isaac Newton did his most revolutionary work during the year The plague closed his university and sent him home to an empty farmhouse in the countryside, alone. Writers, mathematicians, composers, founders. The pattern repeats so often, it stops looking like coincidence and starts looking like a requirement. The deepest original work tends to need a door that closes. Not because collaboration is worthless, it obviously is not, but because a specific kind of mind does a specific kind of thinking that other people, however well-meaning, interrupt just by being in the room. We tend to remember the finished work and forget the conditions that produced it, because the conditions look like nothing at all. A person alone, apparently doing very little. And our own moment makes this harder, not easier. We have built a world that treats every empty minute as a problem to be solved, and every silence as a gap to be filled with a screen. For most minds, that constant input is fine, even pleasant. For the inward-turned mind, it is a slow starvation. It never gets the long, unbroken solitude the deep work requires. So the most important thing it is capable of simply never gets built, and the person spends a whole life vaguely sensing a capacity they can never quite reach. You can see the cost everywhere once you know to look for it. The person who is sharp and original on the page and strangely muted in every meeting. The one who needs a long drive alone to work out what they actually think in a job that never once
I found your vibe, and I found my high, yeah. Let's taste the sky, I'ma change your life, yeah.
Quietly going to waste in a world that keeps the silence switched off. Jung got his tower. The real question is, what happens to that same kind of mind when it never gets one? Which is where this stops being a story about a Swiss psychiatrist who died in 1961 and starts being about you. Because if any of this has felt less like history and more like a description, you already know why. You know the blank look you give in the fast room and the way the real answer arrives 3 hours later, alone, when it is finally quiet enough to think. You know the way company empties you out and solitude fills you back up. You know the pull to shut the door and the guilt that arrives right behind it, and the people who have decided, out loud, that something must be a little wrong with you. And notice this was never really about being alone by itself. Plenty of people are alone and completely empty in it. It is about what your mind starts doing the moment the pressure of being watched lifts off it. The way thoughts you could not reach in company suddenly surface. The way a problem you carried around all week untangles itself the instant no one is standing there waiting for the answer. That is the tell. Not that you enjoy solitude, but that you come back from it holding something you could not have made anywhere else. And if that is you, then a quiet correction is owed to most of your history. Every teacher who wrote that you needed to participate more. Every review that praised the colleague who spoke first. Every person who told you that you were too much in your own head, too far away, too hard to reach. None of them were measuring a defect. They were standing outside a closed door, describing the silence on their side of it, and mistaking it for the whole of you. They could not see the room where the work was happening, so they reported the room was empty. It never was. You are not Carl Jung. This is not a promise that your solitude will produce a body of work that reshapes a century. But the mechanism inside you is the same one that was inside him. An inward-turned mind that does its real work in private, that gets flattened in public and restored in silence, that looks to the people watching like it is underperforming or withdrawing or quietly coming apart. At the exact moments it is doing the most important thing it will ever do. The measures the world used on you were built for the other kind of mind. The fast room, the timed test, the meeting, the open plan everything. They read your silence the way Zurich read Jung's, and they returned the same verdict. And the verdict was wrong for the very same reason. Jung wrote one line near the end of his life that lands differently once you can see all of this. Loneliness, he said, does not come from having no people about one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself. The solitude was never the loneliness. The solitude is where the work gets done. The loneliness was every crowded room where the most important thing you were thinking had to stay unsaid. So, when the guilt comes, the guilt about needing the door shut, about leaving early, about the evenings you spend alone instead of out where a good life is supposedly happening, remember what every single person in 1913 got wrong about the man in the quiet room. Jung wasn't losing his mind in that silence. He was finally free to use it. And neither are you. None of this is permission to disappear from your life for good. Jung's entire survival was in the return, in carrying what he found in the dark back out into the daylight and putting it to work. The goal was never to vanish. It is to stop apologizing for the hours you need alone and to start treating them as the workshop they have always quietly been. One thing before you go. If you had to name the single moment in this that felt less like Jung's life and more like your own, what would it be? The blank room, the friends who fell away, the shut door, the work that only ever comes in silence. Put it in the comments and read the ones already there, because the people leaving them have been sitting in the same quiet, thinking the same thing, certain they were the only one. If this handed you language for something you have carried your whole life, subscribe and stay. That is the entire reason this channel exists. We take the parts of you the world misread, and we hand them back to you correctly. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension. Empaths aren't broken. They're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com.